Oh yes, that was the first trailer for Halloween 2005 in Guild Wars, which, as I mentioned earlier this week, was the first festival event we ever really got to see, and they put out this trailer and it looked very exciting. I'm not sure if this came out after the event or before the event, because I wasn't actually playing the game at this point. This is so early on, I hadn't even started playing Guild Wars 1 right now. I guess it must have been after the event, because you can see a lot of people running around in lines and stuff there as if the event's already happened, and ArenaNet wasn't such a large company, I think, that they would have had that many people necessarily to do that, like on internal servers or whatever. Plus, I think they mentioned, one of the people mentions, "Oh, Gale, are you making a video?" That's in a reference to an old community manager called Gale Gray that used to essentially be the voice of the developers for the game, and everyone pretty much loved her in Guild Wars 1's time. I guess she was making a video there somehow. I've also got the internet has also got another trailer for the 2006 version of Halloween, which I'll either show tomorrow or maybe at the end of this video, just so that we can see. Why am I doing this? Well, because today is Wednesday and we were going to have a little bit of a look at some of the old Guild Wars 1 stuff and how that might affect Guild Wars 2 going forward. Before I jump ahead of myself though, for official news today, there has been an Ask Me Almost Anything over on Reddit. You can find a link to it down in the description. I don't know whether it will still be going on. It might have just ended actually. I don't know how long they'll be answering questions for. But the programmers at ArenaNet, in particular the programmers, okay, are doing an Ask Me Anything, so you can ask them technical questions about the game. These aren't people that you can go to ask about the story, for example, or about expansions and all kinds of generic stuff, which inevitably people have been asking. It's more the actual programmers. So if you yourself are a programmer, or you're interested in getting into programming the games industry, or you're just interested in certain things on that kind of topic, then feel free to go over. They've got a lot of people doing it. It's not just like one guy sat there answering for a team of people. They do have like 15, I want to say, different individual programmers at ArenaNet all answering and reading questions and just going through. So there are tons of answers here if you want any of them. There have been some interesting questions like to do with bots and how they're handling those, and certain Wild versus Wild technical issues, which are kind of cool. I haven't read the full thing for myself just yet. There's so much to go through. But yeah, link in the description. Really good. Kind of official news there. Other than that, there wasn't really very much. I did see, though, somebody earlier had tweeted a response from Gale Gray. What do you know, actually? That's kind of a coincidence. Who had replied to someone complaining that ArenaNet didn't put forward warning if you'd been banned because they thought you were botting or something. And her response was as such, which I do agree, I think was a pretty good response. If you have been wondering this, she said, "It's not reasonable to expect that we will give warnings for a breach of the user agreement. We can spend resources issuing warnings, monitoring behavior, and following up with account actions on those who do not heed the warnings, but that takes a considerable amount of time and effort. Assigning agents to that task means we'd have fewer agents actively helping players get back onto compromised accounts, doing bot hunts, identifying game issues, dealing with gold sellers, researching bugs, and so forth. The prudent use of our resources does not support the issuance of warnings. And quite frankly, once you start giving warnings, you go down a rabbit hole of ineffective support where you're spending too much time talking about the issues and far too little time doing something about them." I think how she ends that note is actually particularly an important one, because that can happen very quickly. They'll just get into these massive long debates with people. Oh, was this against the rules? Was this not? And in the end, it's just not worth the time or hassle. So that's kind of why they've got their certain stance. It is a harder stance than maybe they've got on other things, and not everyone's necessarily going to agree. Everyone's going to bitch and complain if they've just been caught or banned because they've been doing some kind of botting or using some kind of third-party tool that they thought they could get away with. But I think this is a reasonable stance for them to take, and I can understand why they've done it. One thing I don't necessarily agree with is the compromised accounts don't seem to be getting rollbacks at this time. And in fact, what a good tie-in, I think someone actually asked about that on the AMA as well. So there's information out there for when, hopefully, I guess they're going to roll that out and so forth there too. So yeah, that's it really for official news today, though. I'll keep you posted on anything new that comes out on guildwars2.com. I'm hoping for some kind of hint for Halloween as we go forward, but maybe we'll only get that at the end of the week, considering it starts on Monday. I don't know. We'll see as we go forward. In any case, so the first thing I wanted to talk about was Halloween, how it worked functionally in Guild Wars 1, and some of the cool things I would like to see come back for Halloween in Guild Wars 2. Because over the years, it got more and more updates as time went on, and it became this really well-defined festival that everyone knew what they were expecting from, and now it's kind of coming in Guild Wars 2, and I really want to see all the different things, the little things in particular that might come back that will make me go, "Oh, I remember these are so cool." And we've seen that some of these major features are obviously coming back. Mad King Thorn is coming back. We've heard that he's had voice acting done for him. We know that he's going to be there. The Costume Brawl has been mentioned to be coming back. Costume Brawl is an interesting one. So if you're not sure what the Costume Brawl is, it's a returning feature from Guild Wars 1's Halloween, in which you would gain access to a specific kind of exclusive PvP arena that was only available during Halloween. And for participating in combat during this arena, you would acquire points for a title that was associated with participating in mini games that were only available during festival times. And the way the arena worked was you would load in and there would be various points on the map. I believe it was 6v6 in Costume Brawl, and there were various points that you'd have to go and capture. Now, having possession of a specific point on the map would mean that every few seconds your team earned some points, and the first team to a certain threshold of points would win. It's a bit similar really to World vs. World, just on a much smaller scale. The way this was different or unique was everybody's skills. So a lot of Guild Wars 1 was based around your skills rather than how you actually use them in fights. Yes, there was a certain skill level that you had to reach to be able to effectively use your build, but a lot of it was build making, right, and making sure everyone had the right setup. For Costume Brawl, when you loaded in, you were given a specific set of skills that ArenaNet had designed, and what this allowed them to do was create a very well balanced, very finely tuned, very unique PvP experience, because the balance that you experienced there wasn't something that was necessarily optimum play outside of the Costume Brawl. It's just they were all balanced with respect to one another, and they allowed you to use effectively some of the more obscure skills in the game, and it was frequently an awful lot of fun. Now, the way these skills were tied to you was, the idea was when you went to this PvP arena, your costume would change, your literal outfit. You would start role-playing as another character in the story from Guild Wars 1. So you could play as iconic heroes, or not necessarily just heroes, but some of the bigger characters that existed outside the scope of the hero henchman system. And there were so many in Guild Wars 1 because so much of it was about team play and giving you these henchmen and giving you these heroes and these important characters, that every year they could swap around what characters you would actually be playing as. And eventually it got to the point where it would be randomized. If I was a male Mesmer, I had a chance of being different characters in the Costume Brawl. If I was a female Mesmer, then I'd have a chance at other characters. And it was a lot of fun to load in and see you were suddenly playing as Chiriosa, for example, this giant guy, or Nika, or some character you really enjoyed from the first game. The other nice thing about the Costume Brawl was it was on entirely unique new maps in the game. So there were different PvP maps in rotation, just like there are for Guild Wars 2, but they were totally new ones for this game type, and they could have in theory just used pre-existing ones. And in fact, even up to some of the most recent Halloweens, they were still adding new maps there. It was a lot of fun. So what am I hoping from Guild Wars 2? Well, it's the Costume Brawl, so I guess we're going to be able to play as some of the characters from the second game now, which should be interesting. I'm curious to know whether they're going to go for Destiny's Edge or not. Are they going to be playable? Are they on the table? My gut feeling says maybe no. Maybe they'll leave those guys off and it will be some of the more sealed away characters, some of the smaller characters that you might remember. In particular, I'm kind of expecting... Guild Wars 2 has this plethora of unusual characters that are kind of important early on in your story, but then quickly fade away. So for a human noble, for example, it could be Farron. If you were from the streets, it'd be Quinn. As a Char, you have your best friend, warband mate that kind of just fades away as well, and even in the early stages doesn't seem to do that much. But everyone's kind of got these characters that just become distant. There are also some even later on in the story, like Karis and Tegwin, the two Sylvari, that have these minor roles to play, and then they survive the events of the story, but then we don't really hear anything more of them. There are certainly a lot of those characters in Guild Wars 2, and I'm not really sure who I'd be super excited to play as, to be perfectly honest. I'd quite like to play as the characters that I personally had some kind of a connection with, which is what leads me to believe that it could be these early race characters, because that way they can tie it up. So Char players are going to roleplay as some of the warband members that could have been with them, or human characters will be able to roleplay in the costume arena as their best friends, or maybe their sister that they rescued during the events of the personal story. There's nothing that really screams, oh yes, it would be so awesome to me, except outside of maybe the characters of Destiny's Edge. I can imagine some people would like to play as them, and there's Traherne too, but I feel like maybe they're just too big players really to step forward. One other idea I'd find pretty interesting if they did would be to still have the same characters that we were playing as in the Costume Brawl from the first game, but then there's the question of, I don't actually know how many players there are out there that are in Guild Wars 2 that weren't in the first, and how many would really appreciate, oh, we're still playing as these old characters. I would find that fantastic, but I don't know whether everyone else necessarily would. There's another idea too, I suppose, that you could be playing as other characters on your account. That was always an idea people really liked for the use of heroes in the first game, and eventually they did do that, and it was very fun. Maybe this time the costume brawl you'd be role-playing as other characters, but that seems kind of technical and a bit weird, and I doubt ArenaNet would do it, but it would be a cool thing to have seen anyway. But yeah, there's not too much choice though for just characters, I guess, that I'm super excited about. Maybe all the dead ones, all of the ones that died in the plot, there are certainly enough of those floating around. You could be costume brawl as those ones. It kind of fits into the spirit of Halloween, so maybe we'll see that. But again, that's not too high on my list for what I think they'll do. Will it take place on a whole new band of different PvP arenas that we haven't seen, new maps? Maybe. I'd quite like to see at least one new map out there. I've been looking actually at Claw Island on the map and wondering whether it will be there, because that's kind of an unused place. It's a big place in the personal story, but you can't really go back to, and that would be a nice place to give players temporary access back to for the costume brawl. That could be like the hub from which you then load into the costume brawl after that. But that's one particular aspect of Halloween that I'm really looking forward to. As I mentioned though earlier on, there are a lot of small things that Guild Wars 1's Halloween included which I really want to see come back in the second game. For example, items, unique festival items were such a cool part of the festivals, all the festivals in Guild Wars 1. You could only get at this certain time of year and they gave you unique effects. So just a list of them here. First of all, in the later years you could get trick or treat bags, which when you double clicked would give you one of many different specific Halloween themed items, and they range from vials of absinthe, witches brews, ghosts in the boxes, which when you double clicked spawned these ghosts that went boo at people, squash serums that turned your heads into pumpkins, candy apples, which actually gave you some nice stats bonuses, candy corns also gave you nice stat bonuses, pumpkin cookies, which in the first game reduced death penalty, not quite sure what they could do in Guild Wars 2, and lastly transmogrifier tonics, which when you double click, the tonics you're pretty familiar with for Guild Wars 2 now, but these were the first tonics that were ever added to Guild Wars 1, and they would turn you into these candy people, which the 2006 trailer shows off in massive numbers, because that's when they were introduced to the game. So those are all some really cool things that I'd love to see come back in Guild Wars 2. I can't wait to double click my first vial of absinthe. I'm sure it's on ArenaNet's mind to add them back in. They might not add all of the items back in for Guild Wars 2, but certainly a few of them they might. There are references to all of these things written in New Crichton in many of the areas around the game. In particular, again, the Queensdale areas, you can see references to all these kinds of things, not just for Halloween items, but other festivals too. So I'm sure ArenaNet know about them, and I'm sure they know that people will be excited about getting them back. So I guess it's just a matter of time to see which ones they do end up bringing us, and maybe even some new ones as well that we'll see there too. Another big part of Halloween, all festivals in Guild Wars 1, was you would get hats, festival hats, so you could only, originally the idea was you would only get it for that year, and if you miss your opportunity then that's it, that's game over, and then you could always kind of have it as a symbol as, oh look, I was here in Halloween 2005. In recent years for Guild Wars 1, as I mentioned before, they've actually changed that and you can get prior years stuff just because there's less people playing the game, but I'm sure they'll probably do something with hats again. It will probably be tied into the town clothing system that's going to be in Guild Wars 2, which so far I think it's quite nice. I remember when they first announced it, we all went kind of nuts on the forums. We were like, yes, town clothing, this is so cool. There's not much of a variety, and there aren't many ways to get town clothing that I can see in-game right now. There certainly do seem to be a few. The only one I ever really found was a kind of a hidden thing out in one of the char areas where I had to complete this kind of optional little side quest minigame thing where I had to try and fix a motorcycle. That was really cool, but there don't seem to be many in-game right now. So maybe we won't just get hats in Guild Wars 2. It could be full town clothing sets. And also these town clothing sets as well might somehow play into the whole costume brawl thing too. Like you can only enter the costume brawl once you've dressed up as someone else in your town clothing. That would be an interesting way to integrate it into the game a little bit more. I'm sure that will somehow be tied together though. Then of course we know that we're going to be expecting jumping puzzles, events. Guild Wars 1's Halloween obviously introduced quests, introducing events for Guild Wars 2 will make a lot of sense, as well as decorating towns. I'm not sure what's going to be decorated for Guild Wars 2. I'm pretty sure it's just going to be Lion's Arch. The first game they actually went to the trouble of decorating a fair few different areas, but since the town's so big in Guild Wars 2 now, I can imagine it would be a real pain just decorating one area. Lion's Arch, the entire area to decorate all of it, that's going to be a lot of effort gone into just that one area. And actually, I'm kind of looking forward to, if they do decorate the entire place, just exploring Lion's Arch again. Imagine all the cool little things they could have hidden away in all these different areas that you might have explored before and just been like, there's nothing here. And now in Halloween, there could be super cool stuff. And in fact, they might even tie events or specific festival activities to going to some of those more remote regions of the towns of Lion's Arch, for example, that people just don't go to once they've got their map completion, or indeed may have never gone to because they've just used their map and just gone, right, point of interest, vista, skill point, blah, blah. Not even that, just points of interest and vistas because it's a town. And there's so many places that hopefully could be rewarding to to go to once they've decorated it. I'm only really expecting Lion's Arch to be decorated, not anywhere else. It will be interesting to see if they do any kind of global things. Like, they could, in theory, just have it so that for the duration of Halloween, the day-night cycle changes slightly. Maybe it's night for longer than it is day or something. That could be really cool, but I don't know how ambitious they'll try and be with that. When you start talking about those kinds of things, people just start to complain that, oh, this is going to break this, or this is going to break this. Aside from that, though, really, I'm not sure what else we can come to expect for Halloween when we look back at Guild Wars 1. There was a guy called Bruce the Herald in the first game that I think a lot of people kind of forget about, and he was like this Necrid horseman that would gallop along and say, oh, the Mad King's coming, the Mad King's coming, and I think it would be so cool, again, if that would be a really nice touch to see in Guild Wars 2, if Bruce the Herald was still about and he ran forward. Just something that people might look back on and recognise and go, oh my god, I remember this. And the same can be said for a lot of the decorations that will actually be going up in Lion's Arch. There were a lot of very specific looking things, like the moon becoming this horrible kind of pumpkin face that was leering down at people like in Majora's Mask or something. Stuff like that, if that all came back, if there were just little tells and references to Halloween from the first game, that could be really cool and really rewarding for some of us. And hopefully as well, now if you're new to Guild Wars 2 but not the first game, maybe you can appreciate some of that for yourself too after what I've just said. Aside from that though, I'm not sure what else we can come to expect. We'll have to see what they do, but all of this really thinking about how worked in the first game is getting me very excited about it for the second. I had a quick question from Lord Nelson 01, since it is Wednesday I would be doing questions and answers, who just said, I saw a thread on Reddit where someone suggested to reintroduce the Zaician quest in some variations to Guild Wars 2. I'm wondering why they didn't do that from the beginning, as it's such an obvious choice. A lot of people have mentioned this kind of thing, and I definitely think the game is lacking some kind of unique daily activity. I've mentioned before, I think daily and monthly achievements may have originally, they were supposed to change daily and they were supposed to change monthly, and they could have been much more exciting through that, but they never did in the end. I think ArenaNet, they've actually said in interviews long before the game came out that they like the idea of doing something like Nicholas the Traveller, something like the Zaician quest in Guild Wars 2, but maybe they just thought it wasn't necessarily super important for when the game came out. In the first game, it took them a very long time to introduce some kind of mechanic like this. People loved it when it was there, but maybe they're still kind of operating on the same philosophy that it's only something you really need a long time after the launch of the game. Like, they thought that the content that's there as they've thrown it out is more than enough to keep people occupied for a fair few months before they have to add some kind of daily thing. I think what that may have gone over their head though is, yes, there's a lot of content there, but you kind of need these daily changing objectives, like give an event more karma, for example, each day, so that people are actually encouraged to go elsewhere. They kind of need to add those in so that people will be funneled to a lot of the content that's there, because yes, ArenaNet have made a lot of content for the game, but they've made a lot of it very easy to miss. And what it's sorely needing is some kind of Zaician quest system that changes on a daily basis, that encourages people to go to these different areas and see the content that they've put there in the first place. It's not a substitute for the content, it's just used to direct people to it in a proper way, which unfortunately isn't happening. People are just being funneled to Ore because karma rewards are higher there, as I mentioned before. Well, and for good reason, because people need to stay around Ore so that those events don't stall and then people can't complete the story. So I can see why they've done that, but some kind of daily thing, yes, certainly I think the game is in sore need of, and maybe ArenaNet just didn't recognise how badly it needed it until now it's out the door. I mean, especially if they considered the monthly and daily system achievement was originally going to be changing on a daily and monthly basis, but then later on down the line they thought, oh no, it's okay, we'll just leave it like this and keep it consistent, and then all of a sudden didn't quite twig that meant that they seriously needed daily Zaician or Nicholas the Traveller type system on the side as well. So I'm expecting it will be there. ArenaNet have never said that they don't want the system. Maybe it was a little bit of a fumble not having it there at the gates, but this could be something that one of those many other live teams are working on right now. Don't forget, all this Halloween stuff we're talking about, that's just one of like 6 or 7 different live teams, and they'll all be working on that kind of stuff. There's something they're hoping for in November. I wouldn't be surprised if it was this kind of a system, because I think this is one of the main things that Guild Wars 2 needs right now. There's so much in the game, but people just aren't going to it, and this will encourage them to do it. It will give some people some regularity. One big change from Guild Wars 2's endgame from other MMOs is they don't restrict you to only doing one dungeon or raid, for example, once a day. But the one advantage that has in other MMOs, despite limiting people, is that people know that each day they can come on and they can do something else, or each week they can come on and do something else, and they kind of get it in their schedules. Guild Wars 2 doesn't really have anything like that right now, which these daily Zaician type quests could do a lot for. So yeah, that's my thoughts. I'm expecting to see it, but maybe not for a month or two. I think if ArenaNet leave it till after Christmas, that could be problematic. I would certainly like to see it come out out sooner rather than later. In any case, there you go, guys. That's Guild Wars 2 Daily for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow.